Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and good morning. On behalf of the Strategic Vision Institute, I welcome you all at our latest webinar on assessing Pakistan's Kashmir policy, a medium to long-term strategy. We are delighted to have a very distinguished panel for today's discussion. Now let me introduce you the session chair, speakers, and the chief guest. The session chair, Lieutenant General retired Naeem Khalid Lodhi, is a former Defense Minister, Government of Pakistan. He was commissioned in the Corps of Engineers and rose to command a corps. After going through all the important staff, instructional, and command assignments, he had a short stint as Secretary Defense as well before he was appointed as Managing Director and Chief Executive of 4G Fertilizers Company Limited. He is a qualified civil engineer and a Master in War Studies and International Relations. He is also a senior member of the Board of the Governors of the SVI. Our first speaker, Ambassador retired Ashraf Jehangir Qazi, he joined Pakistan Foreign Service in 1965. He has held several national and international appointments as Pakistani diplomat. These include Pakistan's ambassador to the US, China, Russia, Syria, East Germany, and High Commissioner to India as well. He has also served with the United Nations as head of the UN mission in Iraq and special representative of the UN Secretary General to Sudan. Ambassador Qazi holds a master's degree in economics from University of Punjab, Lahore. He is one of the former Director General of the Institute of Strategic Studies, Islamabad. Currently, he writes for various well-known national newspapers and is a participant in various TV discussions. Today, he will be presenting his views on evaluating Pakistan's political diplomatic stance since Article 370 and 35A. Our next speaker, Lieutenant General retired Mohammad Aslam. He was commissioned in one of the oldest regiments of Pakistan Army in November 1971.
Masood Aslam.
Yes, Lieutenant General Masood Aslam. He was commissioned in one of the oldest regiments of Pakistan Army in November 1971. He held various command and staff appointments during his career, including commanding a brigade during Kargil operations and a division along LOC during the 2001 standoff. He commanded the Peshawar Corps from 2007 to 2010 and oversaw all military operations in FATA and KPK during this period. He was later posted as Pakistan's ambassador to Mexico from June 2011 till 2013. He remains actively involved with numerous think tanks in Pakistan and abroad. He has special expertise in countering militancy, violent extremism, and undertaking rehabilitative measures to ensure lasting peace. Today, he will be speaking on supporting the indigenous Kashmiri struggle, dimensions, and prospects. Our chief guest, Sardar Masood Khan, is currently serving as the 27th President of the Azad Jammu and Kashmir, a position he assumed on 25th of August 2016. Immediately before becoming the president, he was the Director General of the Institute of Strategic Studies, Islamabad. Before getting elected as the president of AJK, Sardar Masood Khan had a long diplomatic career with the Foreign Service of Pakistan. Most notably, he served as spokesman of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Pakistan's ambassador and permanent representative to UN headquarters in New York and UN Geneva, Switzerland, and Pakistan ambassador to China. Over the year, he has also held leadership positions in international community. These include President of the Conference on Disarmament, President of Biological Weapons Review Conference, President of the Governmental Group of International Labour Organization, Chairman of the ILO Reform Committee, Chairman of the Council of International Organization for Migration, Chairman of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in Geneva, and Chairman of the Group of 77 and China. In New York, Sardar Masood Khan represented Pakistan as a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council from 2012 to 2013 and became the President of the UN Security Council in January 2013. He was also the Vice President of the Economic and Social Council, Vice President of the UN General Assembly, and President of the Executive Board of UNICEF. Sardar Masood Khan also remained Pakistan's chief negotiator at the Nuclear Security Summit from 2009 to 2015. In the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, he has served as Director General UN, Director General Nuclear Disarmament, Director General OIC, and Director General East Asia and Pacific. His areas of specialization include nuclear diplomacy, Kashmir, South Asia, Pak-China relations, Pak-US relations, multilateral diplomacy, and international humanitarian law. Before we proceed further, I would like to mention that this webinar will be conducted in the form of a panel discussion, during which each panelist will be given 15 minutes. We request all our worthy panelists to kindly follow this time limit. If anyone is having trouble hearing or viewing the webinar or is having any form of connectivity issues, please do mention this in the chat and we shall try our best to address these issues from our end. Kindly note that by default, mics of all the attendees will be on mute and only panelists will be allowed to use mic and video. If anyone from the audience would like to ask a question, they are requested to kindly use the Q&A option to type out their question. Please do include your name as well as your organizational affiliation along with your question. And the question will then be presented to our panel by the moderator during the questions and answer session accordingly. While we fully encourage you to participate, we request you to please be brief in your questions. We shall try our best to ensure that all questions get answered within our allotted time. We would also request the panelists to kindly respond to the question within 2 minutes. Please further note that all the opinions voiced at the SVI platform are independent opinion of the speakers and audiences, and not the official policy of the SVI. This is an open house activity that will be reported in media. If anyone would like to tag or post screen grabs of this event on their personal blogs, web pages, or social media, please do not forget to mention that the webinar was organized by the SVI. Thank you very much. Now I invite Lieutenant General Naeem Lodhi to give his welcome and introductory remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Haris. Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum, good morning. It is a great pleasure that today we are hosting this webinar on a very important subject. First of all, on behalf of Strategic Vision Institute, I welcome all the participants, and my special thanks to the panelists who have taken out time to be with us today. We will be talking mostly about the recent past rather than the entire 70 years. And both our panelists, I think they're eminently qualified to talk on the subjects that have been given to them. They have been introduced. Let me just add one thing, that General Aslam Masood is also father of a Shaheed. He lost his son to the terrorist act. We must know that also. So not only that, he has been fighting Indians and also fighting internal, terrorists sponsored by, again, some external forces. He also lost his son during the process. We all know, we understand that there are a few lessons of history which can just be, enumerated in very short form. One, that you cannot forcibly keep people occupied forever against their will. This is a lesson of history, and we all know that. Second short lesson is that whenever people rise for their freedom and they start fighting it politically and by other means, you cannot hold them for a very long time. They will ultimately get their freedom. And the third, again, not a small lesson, is that whenever the freedom fighters of any area, or those who are seeking freedom politically or whichever way, from a very big force, very trained, large armies, then they need some external support. And that is what our second speaker will be talking about. Now, we expect that by the time our panelists, they have spoken, we should be clear that what are the main strands of present policy on Kashmir as far as Pakistan is concerned. Is it comprehensive approach or it is partial? What effects have been created so far, and what are the likely effects in near future and further future, and do we need to modify them? I think these are the aspects which will be covered in their own subjects, of course, the two panelists, and they've already been introduced to you. I'm especially indebted to any foreigners who have joined us, ambassadors from various countries. We are grateful to you, Excellencies, and we would like you to give your input also on the subject, because this is a hot subject nowadays globally, not only in this region. So I'm sure that all of you are very well versed with it. So without taking much of time, let me first ask Excellency Ashraf Jehangir Qazi Sahab to speak to us on the subject that has been allocated to him. Yes, sir, over to you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Lieutenant General Naeem, Khalid Lodhi, Lieutenant General Masood Alam, Mr. Haris Bilal Malik. Sardar Masood Khan Sahab has not yet arrived, otherwise I would take his name first. the members of the audience listening in. It's a great privilege to be asked to participate in this important discussion on a very important subject. I shall, in order to stimulate some kind of discussion, I shall try and take a somewhat critical and alternative point of view, rather than just reiterating the standard point of view, so that we can explore ideas either in this discussion or even later. Today is day 530 since August the 5th, 2019, when Modi split the Indian occupied state of Jammu and Kashmir into two union territories, turned the valley into a massive prison, and unleashed a brutal and comprehensive campaign of repression against the overwhelming majority community, which continues today. On August the 11th, 2019, 6 days after the Indian action of August the 5th, Genocide Watch warned the world of an impending genocide in Indian-occupied Kashmir and stated that out of the 10 indicators of a genocide process, India's genocidal policies on many of them were far advanced. Just a few days ago, Dr. Gregory Stanton, the founder and president of Genocide Watch, who formulated the 10 indicators and 3 stages of a genocide process, said, "We believe that the Indian government's actions in Kashmir have been an extreme case of persecution and could very well lead to genocide." He described the situation in Indian-occupied Kashmir as appalling. He cautioned that occupied Kashmir was under military rule, and it is a very clear case of pre-genocide. And it's a very clear pre-genocide situation. Dr. Stanton further said that the Indian government has confined more than 7 million Kashmiris to their homes, and the Modi government has imposed a severe communications blackout and a curfew that is so draconian that residents could not even step out. In short, occupied Kashmir has been made into a police state. Dr. Stanton then significantly remarked that so many of the early stages of genocide are already present that we don't have to wait until it is a full-out mass killing campaign to declare genocide. Dr. Stanton, who is an expert in examining mass atrocities around the world, has worked at the US State Department during the Clinton administration. And he observed that he had little hope that the incoming Biden administration would denounce the Indian government for its actions against Muslims in India and in occupied Kashmir. In his opinion, however, Biden should make it clear to Modi that the US would not tolerate the kind of intolerance he was preaching. He said the US would have to employ economic persuasion to convince Modi to abandon his anti-Muslim campaign in occupied Kashmir and in India itself. Nevertheless, he did not expect Biden to follow his advice, even though Dr. Stanton went to the extent of comparing Modi with Adolf Hitler. It is in this context that reportedly the UN cautioned Pakistan after August the 5th, 2019, against using strong language, such as the word genocide, to describe India's actions in occupied Kashmir. I wonder if the United Nations has cautioned the US and the UK similarly against using the same strong language for their description of the situation in Xinjiang. Former US officials recently made clear that on the question of human rights violations, Pakistan cannot expect the US to treat it with the same kid gloves it uses with India when it remonstrates with it on human rights violations. No wonder After a year and a half of Indian atrocities in occupied Kashmir and so-called Western and international remonstrations with India over its actions, India is not under any pressure at all to reverse or even revise its decision of August the 5th, 2019. It has no intention of talking with Pakistan or the leadership of the Kashmiri resistance and freedom struggle. There are, unfortunately, very ominous reports that India may even go to the extent of hanging the valiant Kashmiri freedom fighter and leader Yasin Malik, who is in Tihar jail awaiting a short trial that might condemn him to death. India sees Pakistan as a country without options. And in the opinion of one Pakistani analyst, Pakistan's reaction to August the 5th, 2019 has been full of diplomatic aggression, but empty of any meaningful content other than symbolic gestures. The Prime Minister of Pakistan has called himself the ambassador of the Kashmiri people. He has indeed made several extremely effective speeches, including the one at the United Nations General Assembly 2 years ago. And then last year, he repeated it with another very fine speech. The names of highways have been changed from Kashmir Highway to the Srinagar Highway. And Pakistan has sworn to defend Azad Jammu and Kashmir against any aggression, although the Indian action is so far confined to Indian occupied Kashmir. So Pakistan, at the level of speeches and diplomacy, has taken a very strong stand. However, there is an apparent impression amongst many of the people of Pakistan, and indeed in Azad Jammu and Kashmir and Indian occupied Kashmir, that there is some dissatisfaction and frustration there over the reaction of Pakistan to the existential crisis that India has created for all Kashmiris, whom Pakistan and its people regard as their own brethren. There have been pledges by Pakistan, very sincere pledges, that it would not spare even its last drop of blood or the last breath of its life for the Kashmir cause, as Kashmir has been its and is its jugular vein. In other words, the determination we bring to responding to the situation created by India has been made absolutely clear. But unfortunately, the appearance of some waning in the intensity of Pakistan's position seems to have influenced the reaction of some Kashmiris who feel, and even some of them express, that Pakistan's determination to counter any Indian actions is confined to Azad Jammu and Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan. And it does not extend with as much conviction and priority to the other side of the line of control. This perception can be exploited by India. And in my view, this perception, especially amongst our Kashmiri brethren on both sides of the LOC, has led pro-India occupied Kashmir leaders in the valley, who were initially detained after saying they had committed the biggest mistake of their lives by trusting India, they have begun to creep back to their Indian masters, promising to behave themselves if India would only provide them a fig leaf of a restoration of Article 370 and its 35A annex in the Indian Constitution. Should Pakistan make the mistake of making such a restoration a condition for resuming dialogue with India, and there have been some reports to this extent, hopefully they're inauthentic, it will have essentially abandoned the Kashmir cause. Article 370 of the Indian Constitution has nothing to do with dialogue with India or a Kashmir settlement process. It assumes the dispute is over and Kashmir is part of India, within which it has given it a special status. That is nothing to do with the fact that Kashmir is an internationally acknowledged dispute between two parties, Pakistan and India, and it concerns above all the people of the former state of Jammu and Kashmir. Similarly, the recent apparent misinterpretation of Article 257 of the Pakistan Constitution to mean an acceptance of the third option of Kashmir independence or Kashmiri independence in a two-step process. And such a statement was carried in our newspapers recently. Such a statement would undermine Pakistan's Kashmir diplomacy, which is rooted irrevocably in the UN resolutions on Kashmir. If that UN base is compromised, the base for the Pakistan position in the UN resolutions on Kashmir, if that would somehow be compromised, that base, then Pakistan would be in a very difficult position, and even its status as a party to the Kashmir dispute could be brought into question by those who don't agree with Pakistan. Strategically, this would imply a third option, granting independence to Kashmir. It would imply forfeiting Pakistan's territorial contiguity with China, unless it delinks Gilgit-Baltistan from Kashmir, in which case India could claim that Pakistan has followed Modi's example and that a de facto settlement of the Kashmir dispute has been achieved, even if it has not been formalized. One can imagine the impact of such a step on Kashmiri opinion on both sides of the LOC, which India would exploit to its heart's content. Azad Kashmir could become very alienated, and we should not even contemplate talking about granting independence. And I can tell you the reason. Article 257 of the Pakistan Constitution provides an opportunity to integrate the independence and Pakistani options rather than to undermine Pakistan's Kashmir policy. So when anybody says that Kashmir can be given the third option, they are in fact contradicting the words of the UN resolution and of the Pakistan Constitution. Article 257 is a very important article because it says that when the Kashmiris decide in favor of Pakistan, their relationship with Pakistan will be decided by the people of Kashmir themselves. And they may decide to have something different from the constitutionally defined province federation relationship. In other words, it marries the option of independence with the option of Pakistan, or to put it more clearly, that the independence option is within the Pakistan option for our Kashmiri brethren. However, if we delink the offer of independence from Article 257, we would then clearly be undermining the UN resolutions on Kashmir, which recognizes Pakistan as a party to the dispute and denies the accession of Kashmir to India. And it would create all kinds of confusion amongst our Kashmiri brethren. So I think statements of this kind, which according to our newspapers were reportedly made, need to be avoided. Otherwise, if the way it is interpreted is that it should be a two-step process whereby on the one hand, the people of Kashmir vote to join Pakistan and then vote again to leave Pakistan. That would be a kind of nonsense and all, and I don't think we should get ourselves into that kind of mess. Pakistan does need, as with every important policy, to really reappraise its Kashmir strategy in the aftermath of August the 5th, 2019. So that such contradictions and such misinterpretations have no room within which to develop. As is well known, for a problem to be solved, the two conditions of necessity and sufficiency have to be fulfilled. Diplomacy in the aftermath of August the 5th, 2019 is certainly necessary. And by and large, Pakistan's diplomatic performance has been adequate. But diplomacy is far from sufficient in the present situation with regard to occupied Jammu and Kashmir. And this is the problem. If Pakistan really believes it has no real option except diplomacy to counter India's genocidal policies in Indian occupied Kashmir, it will not have a viable Kashmir strategy. Diplomacy is hugely important. Lawfare is hugely important. They are necessary, but they are not sufficient. The post-August 5, 2019 Kashmir crisis is not a long-term problem, and diplomacy works best on issues like Kashmir over the longer run. But as Dr. Stanton correctly observes, India in the aftermath of August the 5th, 2019 is ratcheting up its repression in occupied Kashmir towards genocide in the short term, not the long term. And diplomacy by itself cannot provide a counter in the short run to a policy of genocide. Diplomacy will need to be reinforced by something much more urgent if India is to be prevented from presenting a blood-soaked fait accompli in occupied Kashmir. Otherwise, as Lord Keynes famously said, in the long run, we are all dead. So diplomacy has achieved things. Pakistan's diplomacy does deserve kudos and will become more and more important, but it will never be sufficient. In order to be sufficient, because this is an urgent short-term problem, India is hoping to crush the Kashmiris within a certain period of time. And the US and the international community, no matter what they say, in terms of actions, they are simply not willing to stop India. That is something that Pakistan will have to find a way of doing itself if we are to be true to our Kashmiri brethren. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellency. Ambassador Ashraf Jehangir Qazi Sahab, you made some great points, and I think in question and answer sessions, more discussion could take place on things like, of course, International Genocide Watch, Dr. Stentis, this statement that it is the situation of pre-genocide situation, then US is not likely to change its attitude towards India and Pakistan. We are diplomatically active, but void and some substantive actions are missing, and we have potential to do much more. And also your assertion that misinterpretation of 257 article of Pakistan's constitution cannot be good for us in the long run. So we'll discuss all this. Thank you very much, sir. And now over to General Masood Aslam, sir. What all possibilities are there? What are the potentials, and what sort of support we think that we should be providing to the Kashmiri cause? Over to you, sir.
Okay, so I tried to make a report card to see where the things stand today after the 5th of August till 5th of February. First, if you look at the things, this is my perception of the things as far as the government of Pakistan was concerned. What were the hopes, goals which were set and which were discussed? First was that the change of political status should be restored, whether we call it restoration of the 373, but that is no change should be accepted. The outcome is in front of you. There was a desire that some UN Security Council resolution on unilateral change in status in J&K could not be achieved. We wanted to have some sort of inquiries by the Security Councils, maybe appointment of a UN Security Council special representative, Secretary General representative, or human rights commissions, OIC inquiries. Nothing really came out. We then expected there should be a domestic mass uprising. Initially, there was a lot of a stage of shock and awe for the people of Jammu and Kashmir Valley. But slowly and steadily, we have seen things have started becoming semi-normal, especially the elections with the district development council elections which have taken place, and the results are, as far as participation is concerned, in the winter months, the participation over 50%, over 50%, and I think the less said, the better. Material support from Pakistan, negligible. Domestic pressure on Indian government, really negligible. External, that is big powers pressure to resolve Jammu and Kashmir. Hardly anyone is moved. Any movement on the lines of BDS, BDS is boycott, divestment, sanctions. What to talk of others within Pakistan, this movement against India could not be initiated. No special emissary or a roving ambassador, and the international efforts, internationalization efforts have only been restricted to, at best, some informal Security Council discussions. Embassies have opened up some desks. We have stood on the roads, and as Ambassador Qazi was mentioning, we've changed the names of the highways, etc. We just recently celebrated the 5th of February as a Solidarity Day with Kashmir. These are all, at best, I would say, symbolic and cosmetic. On the other hand, if you look at the report card, the desires of Modi, next please slide, they wanted to revoke the special status for its mainstreaming, partition of the state into two, it has been done, or rather three. Any external advocacy, mediation, intervention effort has been denied. Mass uprising has been mitigated. DDC polls have been held. I've already discussed them. As far as the issue of the essential services, they were controlled initially, and then conditional 2G, and recently 4G were also restored. However, again, since last night, they have again been, I would say, withheld, but the Indians are moving in a planned and deliberate manner. Settlement of mainlanders and resettlement of pundits. Is it in process? We have all been hearing that how many people, how many hundreds of thousands of people have been given citizenship, etc. Industrialization and local, as well as the foreign direct investment. Land allocations have been done. funds are promised in pipeline, and the process is on. Recently, there was a report that about 2-3 weeks back that things are at a level that Gulmarg, which is supposed to be the winter resort, the entire hotels and makeshift living accommodations for next 2 months till end of February were already totally sold out. Uh, delimitation and legislative assembly elections. Delimitation is in process, and by the end of 21, they hope that they should be able to go in for a legislative assembly elections in the entire 3 parts of Jammu and Kashmir. Uh, Having seen this, uh, before, please go next. I just also wanted to highlight what are the enduring vital interests which are linked to Jammu and Kashmir. Right of self-determination, an unfinished agenda of the independence. Pakistan is very closely linked with it. The water security of Pakistan, which is directly linked with the food security. Territorial integrity, that is Indian claims of Gilgit-Baltistan, Azad Jammu and Kashmir, and the whole. So, of course, this is vitally linked with Jammu and Kashmir, our economy with CPEC, and the people's bond of affinity of religion, ethnic, and cultural. So these are some of those which I thought need to be kept in mind before we move forward. And before I go on to the dimension and prospects and how I look at the things, some assumptions which I think need to be highlighted. And these assumptions are very important because if you remember, you people will recall, General Lodhi also highlighted at the very beginning. The first point which we all need to remember is that what is Pakistan? So the least common denominator for all this approach would have to be that there has to be a clarity, a cohesion in our policy making. It has to be a unified and whole of government approach. It can't be only one person or a few departments linked with this. It has to have strategic goals which must always remain the premium in all public policy and our day-to-day working. The public servants will have to really put their act together and become genuinely loyal. They have to be qualified, impartial, and so that the public interest is well looked after. The second assumption which must be remembered is that these unresolved bilateral disputes with India will remain critical, and they are triggers of conflict, insecurity, and internal political and economic instability. So we must remember this thing, that this is likely to happen. Number third is the big power struggle and strategic rivalry in Sino-Indian competition will continue in considerable future. The fourth one, which I have, is that Pakistan will continue to struggle to navigate and balance its relations with the big powers and carve its own place in the new world order. So having seen that, please, the next slide. I go on to the strategic options for the short haul and the long haul. In the short haul, the easiest what is happening is we can say, okay, do nothing, sleep on it. That is stand still and freeze. This is one option which is many people would talk about. And I think I'll not go into detail because that will be a long debate and I am short of time. The other option in a short haul is that a modified Kosovo East Timor model that is under Chapter 7, Article 42 of the UN Charter. It's a very tough task. A modified version of Kosovo as per Security Council resolution of East Timor, etc., to seek establishment of a UN transitional administration, again, very difficult. So long haul. So we go into the long haul. We need to realize now there's a time we have to again start working on the drawing boards. How we have to start from today. What has happened in the last 70 years has brought us to this position that many people are saying that there's Pakistan, that as the Modi is thinking, Pakistan is left with no option. So we have to work out enhanced international advocacy and how to go in for boycotting, divestment, and sanctions of India. There has to be a detailed plan, whether human rights are going to be part of it, humanitarian angle, or the right to self-determination, or the unfinished agenda of the UN Security Council resolutions. We have to work on that. At home, we need to start off boycotting and sanctioning India. Only then can India start feeling. And then can we do it with the OIC? It's a difficult task. So next forward. Next slide, please. Now we come on to the material support. There are two types of things, either soft interventions and hard and kinetic interventions. The soft interventions will remain in the realm of the broadcast, Radio Free Europe or Radio Liberty type, and throwing of leaflets, USBs, providing balloon campaigns, DVDs. We keep encouraging strikes, processions, boycott inside the valley, inside the Indian-held Kashmir. Moral and financial as well as humanitarian support to the people of Kashmir, and encourage the situation to come to a situation where people start off a civil disobedience and bring in a paralysis in the administration. This is a really not a easy task to start off, but that's how we have to move. And if we go on to the hard and kinetic part, we start off with rocking the boat a little. That is, we only focus on Jammu and Kashmir, and not in the initial stages try and divert our attention everywhere in the other areas where some sort of separatist movements are going on. Then how we have to bring that state of mind in the youth of the Jammu and Kashmir that they decide to go in again for a military struggle. For that, there have to be material support as well as physical support. I'll not like to go into any other detail. The policy of 1,000 cuts, working on internal fault lines, and then we must remember it is only the Indian occupied Kashmir, initially state individuals be directly involved, later on all state individuals can join in. But at the same time, if we think of going in for hard and kinetic options, our own military preparations and contingencies have to be worked. So, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, it's not an easy thing, and I would not like to go into details of all those things because these are some of those where the world is going to really get after us. After effects of FATF. And the way our economic lifeline is really strangulated. But whatsoever we may do, we must have some desired and end state. And to that end, thing is the people of Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir have the right to choose their destiny and live their lives as they choose. Independently, with India or with Pakistan, we have to understand the ground realities. I am not saying we encourage anything. We have to work on certainly the UN Security Council resolutions, but we have to really harness the entire Kashmiri, I would say, community. It can't be. We should not be at this point in time trying to focus on only one point agenda. it has to be, everybody has to get together, that they first get the right of self-determination. When it will be, when the details and mechanics will be worked out, then we will see how it moves forward. And we need to, at the same time, have this thing in our mind, that certainly we have to be prepared for the military options, but it is better and it is advisable that military has to be kept as the last resort. But before that, the issue has to be resolved and tried to be resolved peacefully. Ladies and gentlemen, that's what I think in this short time I can say. The rest we can discuss later on. Thank you, Haris.
Thank you very much, sir. Thanks a lot. I think some very important points brought out. You showed us a report card where whatever we were expecting is not actually happening, and Indians have a plan and they are going accordingly. We have to have a whole of nations approach. And then you also hinted at certain strategic options, short term and long term. You also defined the material support, both in terms of soft and substantive support. Thank you very much, sir. Do we have our chief guest? No. So what I...
Chief guest will arrive in 5 to 10 minutes. Meanwhile, we can start the question answer session.
Okay, okay. So whenever he arrives, I will interrupt for a moment, welcome him, and then we can ask him to speak, and then we will continue with the question answer session. So have you already received some questions, Haris?
Sir, I've received few questions. If you allow, I can read it.
Okay, okay. You can go with the first question.
Okay, sir.
Go ahead.
The question is from Mr. Atikur Rahman. India has always narrated that Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir is its internal matter. My question is that how can Pakistan handle this and convince world, especially the P5, about that that Kashmir is not India's internal issue? He has not identified the speaker. So anyone from the panel?
Okay, Excellency Ashraf Jehangir Qazi, I think he can easily handle this.
India has contended that Kashmir is an internal matter, and they also extend their claims to cover Azad Jammu and Kashmir, which they call Pakistan occupied Kashmir, like we refer to Indian occupied Kashmir. However, the United Nations resolutions explicitly reject the Indian contention that Kashmir is an internal matter. And even to the credit of the UN Secretary General, he, in the aftermath of August the 5th, 2019, did say the resolution should be the resolution of Kashmir, or the solution of the Kashmir dispute, should be in accordance with UN resolutions and all. So that position of not recognizing Kashmir as part of India, that is the global situation. Now, what happens is that for strategic reasons, many countries, while they maintain this position, in effect argue or assume or act on the assumption that Indian occupied Kashmir is essentially part of India, and Azad Kashmir is essentially to be treated as part of Pakistan. And you finish the subject and say the LOC is in effect to be treated as an international border, which it is, of course, not so. Now the question is that we have lived with this deadlock, and you could continue talking until the cows come home with this deadlock or the pre-August 5th status quo. But India has exacerbated the situation. How has it exacerbated the situation? Its decision of August the 5th, 2019, unilaterally changed the status of Jammu and Kashmir, or the part that is occupied by it, which is a direct contradiction of the similar agreement, which forbids parties taking unilateral action to change the situation on the ground. Therefore, India has in effect denounced the similar agreement, and the LOC derives from the similar agreement, and therefore the LOC is moot as a result of India's actions. And India at the same time has been threatening Azad Kashmir also by saying that is ours and we will do this, that, and the other and all, whether or not it has a plan or intention of doing so, because that would then internationalize the Kashmir problem beyond anything that has happened so far, especially considering India and Pakistan are nuclear weapon states, with no warning time between them. You know, they're adjacent, neighborly nuclear weapon states, unlike America and Russia, which at least had 15 minutes warning time. And you know, there's several incidents that took place that within those 15 minutes, they were able to sort of ascertain what the reality of the situation was so that false alarms were corrected. Between India and Pakistan, number one, there is no time within which a false alarm can be corrected. If you have a false alarm, you press the button. There's no other time and all. Secondly, India is looking for a first strike option vis-a-vis Pakistan, which a first strike option, as you all know, is a strike which disables the opponent from being able to retaliate in similar kind or at all. So if India were to go for a similar strike, for a first strike, and Pakistan were also devote its resources to developing a counter first strike, that becomes the most unstable situation, because any rumor could set off all kinds of alarms that India is about to press the button and you don't have enough time to check out, or Pakistan is about to check the button and India doesn't have any time to check out. So you just automatically do something. And so mathematically, it becomes an absurd position in which illogical irrationality becomes the appropriate response. Right now, we both have a second strike capability. Were India to attack Pakistan, Pakistan has the ability to retaliate in such a manner that it would inflict huge damage on India and vice versa. So it's a relatively stable situation. So right now, so what after August the 5th and the launching of a genocidal process in occupied Kashmir has destabilized the situation. Quite frankly, as I would say, the gist of what I was getting at, if Pakistan merely follows ineffective diplomacy and diplomacy against a large power like India, which is absolutely determined not to revise its position one bit, and none of the big powers, not even friend China, will put that kind of pressure on India on behalf of Kashmir. It will do it on behalf of the territory it regards as its own, but it will not contemplate going to war because of Pakistan. Unless India attacks Pakistan for no good reason, then China is likely to respond as a strategic friend.
Thank you, sir.
So we are in a very, very difficult situation in which diplomacy alone, however brilliant and excellent, is simply not enough. You have to have something more. What is it? Well, we were given all the options and all. Unless you can be credible on the non-diplomatic side, that if India proceeds towards genocide, Pakistan doesn't want a war, but Pakistan will do everything to stop India, because if Pakistan does not stop India, its own existence is put into jeopardy. This is the core of the message we have to tell the world. And then we have to be good enough, you know, because the rest of India will tell the world Pakistan doesn't have the options, doesn't have the will to go to war, because that will be the end of Pakistan. Well, there are certain things in which you have to place pressure, even if they appear to be very highly risky, or you tell the world, or you tell the people of Kashmir, we have no options, we have done the best, we will continue being diplomatic and we will not change our stand, but good luck to you, you're on your own. Well, what will be the reaction of people in Pakistan? What will be the reaction of the people in Azad Jammu and Kashmir? You have to contend with that. And have we done enough thinking on this? Maybe in secret, but certainly not in public.
Thank you very much, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored that our chief guest and the keynote speaker, His Excellency President Azad Jammu and Kashmir, Sardar Masood, is with us. Thank you very much, sir, for taking out time to be with us. We know that you are a very busy person, but this is an important webinar that we are conducting. Basically, what we are doing is, sir, we are trying to assess the present Pakistan's policy towards Kashmir, and we are discussing that can we add something to it, or can we subtract something to make it more effective in the short term and the long term. We are eagerly waiting for your comments, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, General Lodhi, and other participants, other distinguished participants of this webinar. Since I've come late to this event, I have missed the contribution that have been made by other panelists. So so assess Pakistan's Kashmir policy, our medium to long-term strategy. I would say that we do not have that luxury. We have to have a short-term policy. As a matter of short-term means a policy that addresses the challenges that we face in the next 6 months, 1 year, 2 years. And medium-term would be probably 4 to 5 years, and long-term would be a decade. But let me tell you that why do I say that a short-term policy is required? Because the situation on the ground in the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir is changing rapidly. It has been changing at lightning speed since August the 5th, 2019. The state has been divided into two parts. It has been colonized, it has been invaded, occupied. The people are being brutalized every day. But these are some of the ways India has applied to illegally annex the territory to its federation. But the most pernicious step that it has taken is to change the demography of the region, because they have imported about 3 million people from India, mostly Hindus, and they're settling them there so that Kashmiris do not remain Kashmir anymore. Kashmiri Muslims' identity and their influence is diluted. So if we do not do anything in the next 2 years, and if this number swells to, let's say, 5 to 6 million in the next 2 years, whatever we would do would be too little, too late. And we would have to acquiesce in the actions that India has taken. I mean, the people of Jammu and Kashmir would not acquiesce in what India has done. Of course, there would be turbulence. Of course, there would be a backlash. There is a backlash there. The people of Jammu and Kashmir, the Valley of Kashmir and Jammu and Ladakh, they haven't accepted India's colonization. But what if this demographic composition is changed for all times to come? And now this next question is, what can we do to stop that? Do we have some leverage vis-a-vis India or with the international community or with the international capitals? So I think that we need to go back to drawing board, list all these challenges, and come up with a roadmap for challenges, as for our responses, which are effective. Now, when I stepped into the room, I was able to listen to our very outstanding ambassador and an icon in the Foreign Office, in fact, Mr. Ashraf Jehangir Qazi, our respected ambassador, and he was talking about genocide. Now, genocide is taking place in the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. I don't know how many of you have seen this story about Fatou Bensouda, who is the Prosecutor General of the ICC. She has indicted Israel for constructing illegal settlements in the occupied Palestinian territory. Her statement was issued a couple of days ago, and she says that what Israel has been doing, it constitutes war crimes and genocide. Now, but I have always highlighted that Israel has taken about a century to reach this stage, you know, of annexation of the occupied territories. I mean, you would recall that the process started with the Balfour Declaration last century, and it was 1918. And now, after 102 years, they were able to convince Washington that they should annex these occupied territories. In the first 30 years, what they did was that they created pockets of Jewish population in the occupied territory. Then, of course, 1948, their state was created. And then the occupied territories in 1967 and 1972 wars, and they started building these illegal settlements there. And after they had built these settlements, they started thinking, I mean, they discarded this two-state solution, and they started thinking of annexing the territory, and they took concrete steps to consolidate their occupation and annexation of the occupied territory. India wants to complete this process in 4 years. As a matter of fact, I had said 4 years. They started it in 2019, and they'll complete it in the next 2 years, so that then they can go to the voters in India, their violent extremist Hindu base, and the periphery also, and convince them that this is what they have done in Kashmir, and they should be rewarded with another term in the next elections. So this is the agenda as far as India is concerned, in addition to the strategic agenda that they have vis-a-vis China, vis-a-vis Pakistan, and their doctrine of Hindutva, which I think that makes it mandatory for these zealots to create an Akhand Bharat. Now, these are the challenges, and sometimes I feel that because of our internal problems, we do not hear very clearly the messages coming from Delhi, because their leaders, the Bharatiya Janata Party and Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, they give these threats very openly to Pakistan, to the neighborhood, and usually they follow up on them. They follow up on them, and they write these things in their manifestos. So our reaction time is very limited. So if we're planning, if we're chalking out a medium-term plan, that won't work. Now, I said, do we have leverage with India? And leverage is zero. The only, I mean, in terms of dialogue or in terms of engagement, because India has shut all the doors for engagement in diplomacy. We have leverage in the sense in our sense of nuclear deterrence. Not only nuclear deterrence, but also conventional deterrence. And India dare not attack Pakistan, but they're doing lots of things beneath the threshold of nuclear and conventional capability of Pakistan. So all these asymmetric steps that they are taking, for instance, these false flag operations, or these intimidations, or the declaration of their intent to take Azad Kashmir militarily, or investing heavily in anti-SEPEC project. I mean, they are sabotaging that project, or subversion in Balochistan. Now, they're doing this so that they can create conditions for implosion in Pakistan. So when we talk about Kashmir, we have to realize that we're talking about the entire state of Pakistan. It's not a remote land that we're talking about. It is not alien people that we're talking about. We are talking about the citizens of Pakistan, and we are talking about an integral part of the state of Pakistan, which has been cut off from Pakistan through aggression that was committed, an occupation that was committed back in 1947, and now it continues up to this day. We also have leverage, and some windows opened automatically, as a matter of fact, in the international community. I'm talking about the European Parliament, the US Congress, also the British Parliament, some ASEAN countries. All these parliaments woke up to the ugly reality in the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir and India's extremist policies. But, and then of course the media, the international media, I mean, it extensively covered the issue of Jammu and Kashmir after August 5th, 2019, and did it for a while until its attention drifted to other issues. So, and the think tank community and other civil society organizations, our diaspora community, as a matter of fact, has played a pivotal role in internationalizing the issue of Jammu and Kashmir. We have leveraged that. But some of these things happened not because we were very proactive. They were also appalled by these developments in the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Our state also engaged them. I mean, I want to give this credit to our state that we reached out to them, and the diaspora community had been working for years. As a matter of fact, I mean, before August the 5th, 2019, I had been going to these capitals, the different capitals of the world, and we were talking about the same themes. I mean, at that time, we were telling people that a genocide is going to take place in the occupied territory. And we were talking about demographic changes, impending demographic changes. We were also talking about the catastrophe that was about to be unleashed. So what I'm saying that the Pakistani anchors, I mean political anchors and others, and Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they'd been lobbying abroad, and that had an impact. But what I want to say that we need to have a more effective interface with the international community, the parliamentary community, also the civil society organizations. One pincer that has been quite weak is the political pincer. Let me tell you that, what do I mean by that? You know, when people talk about Pakistan's position, in one sentence, in one phrase, they say that we extend moral, political, and diplomatic support to the people of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, this front is open. As a matter of fact, it can be as effective as any kinetic front that you can imagine. But let me tell you that there is a differentiation between the diplomatic outreach, the diplomatic effort, and the political effort that that needs to be made, that ought to be made. Now, let me tell you, the diplomats usually, I mean, Foreign Ministry would go to the United Nations Security Council, the UN General Assembly, Human Rights Council, and other related forums. They would also go to bilateral capitals, and this is done under the stewardship of the Foreign Minister, the Foreign Secretary, and also all our ambassadors contribute to this endeavor, and it is all done under the direction of the Prime Minister of the country or the Chief Executive of the country. And Pakistani Foreign Ministry is trained to do that, I mean, under all circumstances. I think that they increased the speed of their outreach after the developments in August 2019. Political, what is the political dimension of the endeavor that I'm talking about? Politicians, heads of political parties, first they should develop an agreed, a common political platform, project it nationwide, so that we have this consensus building around the situation. And then they meet their counterparts all around the world. I mean, of course, the ruling party, the opposition parties, they have their counterparts in other political parties all around. These political parties have their own coalitions in the Asia Pacific, in Europe, in the Americas. So, and they should show up in parliaments. For instance, I recently said I was talking to a bunch of lawmakers abroad, and I was talking to some parliamentarians recently, Pakistani parliamentarians, and I pointed out, everybody was complaining in that seminar that is the conscience of the world dead? And I said that how many of you know that last year in the European Parliament, which comprises 751 members, 626 members tabled half a dozen resolutions. And those resolutions condemned India's actions in Kashmir and also in regard to the Citizenship Amendment Act. And they demanded that Kashmiris be given their right to choose their own political future in accordance with the United Nations Security Council resolutions. Half a dozen resolutions by all the dominant groups, these are called groups in the European Parliament. In fact, these are coalitions of political parties Europe-wide. I asked, how many of you either thanked them by writing letters to them, or did you show up in Brussels and Strasbourg and said, thank you? Those resolutions which were tabled were later on scuppered and sabotaged by the Indian lobby, because these resolutions were tabled in late January 2020, and these Indian lobbies, they said that Narendra Modi would be visiting Brussels in March, and you shelved them for a while, and you could take them up later after the visit. But then COVID-19 hit the world, and those resolutions were shelved for all times to come, presumably. Recently, the British Parliament held a debate, and in 2019, the US Congress and the Tom Lantos Commission on Human Rights, they spoke up. They held a series of hearings, and they called out India for its crimes against humanity. So our political circles are not interfacing with the rest of the world, their counterparts, because if there's any chance of Kashmiris getting justice, it is through our civil rights movement and international civil rights movement. You know, closed chambers, I mean, meetings in closed chambers or even parliamentary chambers, they would contribute to the overall awareness raising about Kashmir. But we need to have a people's movement first in Pakistan. If our squares and streets are empty, except on the important days like the Kashmir Solidarity Day, and the anger of the Pakistani population or the population of Azad Kashmir is not palpable, how do we expect that the world would rise and speak up for Pakistan and speak up for Kashmir? My last point is, and I'm not going to the details of the kind of roadmap that we should have, because the cast that I see on the screen is very experienced and very knowledgeable, and they must have come up with lots of ideas. This is this dilemma of how to deal with genocidaires who are committing genocide, ethnic cleansing, war crimes and crimes against humanity in the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The world is watching it. The world knows about it. I have, speaking to the Western audience, I've said that you have the best, the most sophisticated, the most resourceful intelligence agencies. You have satellite imagery, you also have human intel, so you know what's happening in Kashmir. We don't have to tell you, because you have these big budget intelligence agencies. In addition to what the intelligence agencies would gather in regard to human rights violations and the massacres that are going and the land grab that is going in Kashmir, there's open source information. And I think that the open source information, despite all the communication blockades and Indian attempts to hide their crimes, the world knows about it. The world knows about it. Open source information constitutes 90% plus of the information that is available on the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Then there are these embassies sitting in Delhi and in the region who are reporting regularly to their foreign officers. So there can't be any pretense that the Western countries or the decision makers sitting in the Security Council do not know how serious the situation is, how alarming this turbulence is in Jammu and Kashmir, how that ugly experiment of genocide in last century Nazi Germany is being repeated here in Kashmir with impunity, without any accountability. So I think that what Fatou Bensouda has done, this Prosecutor General of ICC, is trend-setting, because Israel is a very, very powerful country, and it has the backing of the biggest state and the most powerful state in the world, which is the United States of America. And yet, ICC prosecutor has the quote-unquote temerity to call a spade a spade. Let's reach out to our interlocutors and sort of convince them to call a spade in the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir also. And let's steer this movement towards two things. One is that holding these genocidaires sitting in Delhi accountable. And second is that we should start sanctions movement against India. boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against India. Yesterday and a couple of days ago, I was addressing a large gathering at the Chamber of Commerce, Islamabad Chamber of Commerce and Industries. And yesterday, chambers of commerce and industries from all over Pakistan joined in through Zoom link. And I said that you want the international community to do something about Kashmir, then all the chambers should boycott India's products. Boycott India's products. That would have an impact. Because if you don't do it, your words addressed to the rest of the world will have absolutely no impact, no credibility. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir, Excellency. I just would like to know if you can spare about 10 minutes with us so that some specific questions which the audience wants to ask from you, if you will be able to spare that time, sir. Up to you, sir. Right. Haris, you can sift the questions, those which have been asked from the president, and just let us know about them.
Sure.
You can tell the audience they can ask questions if they wish so.
Sure,
10 minutes for that.
The question is from Ms. Zinia Sati to the chief guest. Will the troubled world we are in now with the pandemic and various other major troubles like America's political turmoil give India the go-ahead to commit genocide in Kashmir without any international scrutiny?
Shall I respond to the question?
Ji, sir.
Yes.
Ji, sir.
My response is that India has already given a carte blanche. I mean, the world has already given a carte blanche to India. They may not be saying it to India that go ahead and commit genocide, but by looking the other way or by being silent in the Security Council and other relevant forums, they are underwriting India's genocide. And I think that the questioner used the future terms. And I would say that it is already happening. It has been happening for the past 2 years. It has been happening for decades, as a matter of fact. But I mean, this new intensity that we see started in August 2019. So the Western countries, I mean, what do? They did it last century. Their reflexive action is to appease the monster, appease the fascist. This is what they did to Hitler and to Mussolini. And the result was that the monster became even more monstrous, and Hitler started attacking and occupying his neighboring countries, in addition to eliminating Jews and Romanis and Poles and so on. So India is doing that. The world is looking the other way, or the world, many of the powerful nations are looking at Kashmir through the prism of Delhi. And so this is because of their economic interests tied with India. This is also because of their strategic considerations, because they think that India is a counterweight against China. So they're using India as a pawn, and India has accepted that role. So I would say that this is already happening, and that's why we need to make bigger noises. I mean, it's like Kashmir is on fire, and you have to ring bells loudly for fire brigades, for God's sake. Otherwise, this whole edifice would be burned to ashes. So this is precisely what is happening, because most of the people in Pakistan, including some very, very informed thinkers, they think that we have the luxury of time to think, plan. It's when we talk about Kashmir, we should talk about firefighting, as a matter of fact. So yes, the world is already tolerating India's genocide and not holding it accountable.
Thank you, sir. Or dekho, Haris, any other question?
There is another question. Mr. Shahbaz Ahmad, a graduate of International Islamic University, Islamabad. In real politics, as we know, states work for their own power and interest. So all the major powers have their own interest in this particular conflict in form of war, economy, weapons, business. So why the world sensitized on human rights basis?
Well, it's
To
a
the
very good
president,
question.
sir.
Yes, it's a very good question. Let me respond to it. You see, the point is that we're talking about realpolitik. Yes, realpolitik is a real uh, uh, challenge that we face, and it's very, very substantive. I mean, because in international politics, um, since the Westphalian system was constituted, or Westphalian system, state-centric system came into existence, for centuries, realpolitik has been driving international politics. No doubt about that. Let's take that as a baseline. But let me also tell you that in the last century, the world came to realize that there's short-term realpolitik and there's long-term realpolitik. If you miscalculate and solely rely on realpolitik in the short term, it may have long-term unintended consequences. For instance, the realpolitik last century was to appease Hitler. It suited real political interests of the United Kingdom and France to not confront Hitler. And what were the costs that they paid? As a matter of fact, later on, in order to wrestle down this monster, they had to create the biggest ever war machine in the history of the world. And hundreds of millions of people were killed during that war, and resources were wasted, and also the cities and towns and countries were devastated worldwide. That was the cost that they had to pay. Now, when we talk about Kashmir, we are warning the world that their real interests would be hurt if they do not pay attention to Kashmir. First is, of course, human rights violations, because Kashmir, the situation in Kashmir is being replicated in other parts of India. You had these Shaheen Bagh demonstrations. You have this farmers demonstration. You also have, the world is talking about, I mean, you see these reports that genocide is taking place in Myanmar and Kashmir. So the world is being warned. Also, Myanmar and the Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir are being compared for these internet lockdowns, prolonged internet lockdowns and communication blockades. So the world is being informed. So this is one dimension that if this happens, India might well disintegrate, because this kind of brutality and cruelty in this day and age cannot be sustained. And it will spread to the other parts of India where people are marginalized. So it is, what India is doing is detrimental to India's long-term interests. Second, the world, I mean, when we think of Kashmir, it is nestled between India and Pakistan. And these are two nuclear weapon states. They can be this situation, this brutalization and annihilation of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. This can lead to a war. We're already in a state of war. It can escalate to the conventional, to the nuclear level. And if that devastation takes place, if that nuclear apocalypse occurs, then Berlin and Brussels and London and Kuala Lumpur or Tokyo or Seoul, they would also not be safe from the consequences of even a very, very limited nuclear exchange, like the one we saw in the Second World War, and the kind of crude bombs that the United States used in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So what I want to say is that if that catastrophe happens, the world will have to pay a heavy price. I'm not saying that Pakistan intends to go to a nuclear war, but India is saying that it would. Indian Prime Minister last year on the Republic Day said from the Red Fort that it would destroy Pakistan in 7 to 10 days. And Narendra Modi himself said that he would not hesitate to use nuclear weapons. He revised no first use doctrine of India also. So did Rajnath Singh. So we are not talking about war. India is talking about war. And who knows, can you trust these leaders with nuclear weapons? Do they understand the consequences of the use of nuclear weapons? So your question about realpolitik is correct, but realpolitik has many long-term consequences which must be factored in by the Western countries, by the countries of the region.
Thank you, sir. जी हारिस और कोई सवाल प्रेसिडेंट के लिए?
Sir, there is no question. There are no more questions to President.
So, Excellency, we are really grateful for sparing time with the Strategic Vision Institute. We really benefited from it. We would have liked to interact with you the whole day, but keeping in mind your time, so kind of you for being with us,
Yes.
and we have benefited a lot. So,
General Lodhi, it's always a pleasure to see you and all the participants. This very, very impressive cast that you have included in today's webinar, and I am privileged to have this conversation with such informed audience. This is a very difficult time for Pakistan in terms of our policy regarding Kashmir, also our economy, also our national security as a whole. So it has been a privilege for me to talk to you and exchange these views with you. And inshallah, we'll stay in touch and we'll have more conversations on the subject. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Haris, you can continue with the other questions.
Yes, sir.
Ji.
The question is from Mr. Nuruddin Ahmed. He's a former brigadier from Pakistan Army. When we talk about option of independence, do we take into account Azad Jammu and Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan? He has not identified the speaker to whom the question is addressed. So anyone from the panel can respond to the question.
I think because it pertains to diplomacy, so Excellency, probably, sir, you will be able to answer it.
Thank you very much. Can I have a repeat of the question?
Yes, sir. Sure. When we talk about option of independence, do we take into account Azad Jammu and Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan as well?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I tried taking that into account when I made my remarks about a report attributing, a remark saying that Pakistan would be willing to give independence to Kashmir. And I think it was envisaged as a two-step process. They would first vote to come to Pakistan, and then Pakistan would grant Azad Kashmir independence. I don't know whether there was a clarification, but as we regard Kashmir as one. The Kashmiris see themselves as one. It is the Indian action which led to the ceasefire line and then the line of control. But the United Nations resolutions are applicable to the whole of the former state of Jammu and Kashmir. So there is one Kashmir. And that one Kashmir under UN's resolutions, if they are allowed their right of self-determination, will have two options, India or Pakistan. Now, some people have said, well, it would be only fair after 70 years if there was a third option of being independent and all. And many Kashmiris believe an independence option to be their best option rather than even the Pakistan option. India, almost all the people of the valley, and other places too, wherever the Muslims reside, do not wish to be part of India. Now, the fact of the independence option, as I have said, should really be within the Pakistan option to be consistent with the UN resolution, which is the basis of Pakistan's position. If you grant a third option, you're undermining the UN resolution, which is the basis of Pakistan's position and which acknowledges Pakistan as a party to the state and rejects the accession of Kashmir to India. So that would be a very foolish thing to do. Now, Article 257 of the Pakistan Constitution, in my reading of it, and I'm not a lawyer, but I would like lawyers to go through it and give me their opinion. It in effect gives Kashmir the third option within the Pakistan option because it states clearly, as I said, that when they choose to come to Pakistan, they can choose a degree of autonomy which is not confined to the federal relationship as defined by the Constitution. No, it says they will have a relationship with Pakistan as determined by the Kashmiris themselves. It will be for the Kashmiris to determine it. So the Constitution has allowed them the maximum possible degree of autonomy, within the Pakistan option. So that is effectively the third option. That is the best. If you go further, you are then undermining your whole position. And who's the gainer? Not Kashmir or Pakistan, but India. So here we need to be very clear. I will add one more point, if you'll allow me, as President of Azad Jammu Kashmir mentioned, that it is important for Pakistan to go to the revisit its entire Kashmir policy. And although we can put our case more effectively to the international community by quoting all kinds of things, and he gave us a very good idea as to how our diplomacy should unfold in that respect. The fact of the matter is that India doesn't care for the opinions of the international community with regard to Kashmir. It knows that it is too important, too big for the international community to bring the kind of pressure which would force it to revise its position. The only thing that can force the international community to wake up would be if Pakistan began to assert itself and say, we want a peaceful settlement. We want a peacefully negotiated settlement. We want it to be in accordance with the wishes of the people as is in the UN resolutions and all. But if India not only refuses, as it has been refusing for 70 years, but if it is stepping up, ratcheting up the tension towards genocide, which is, as I said, and as the president himself said, is a short-term emergency, not a longer-term problem. If that is going to happen, and Pakistan believes it has no other option except the diplomatic option, then it has already lost Kashmir. Because the world is never going to press India unless Pakistan forces it. And the only way Pakistan can force it is to say, you should know what Kashmir means. If India is able to get away with its present policy through genocide in occupied Kashmir, Pakistan will not be able to survive. And therefore, it's an existential problem for Pakistan. And Pakistan will do everything possible to stop genocide being perpetrated by India in occupied Kashmir, since there is no difference between occupied Kashmir and Azad Jammu and Kashmir as far as we are concerned, and as far as the people of Kashmir are concerned. This has to be the lead argument in Pakistan's presentation, so that the world knows Pakistan won't sit back and just cry because the international community is not responding. Pakistan is telling them that this is an extraordinarily dangerous position, because Pakistan will have no option but to rise and stop India, no matter what the cost, no matter what the outcome. And the president outlined what the thing can be. As far as Japan, as far as Europe is concerned, it can be a global disaster, if there is an actual war. Pakistan is not advocating. Pakistan is talking about avoiding war, avoiding nuclear disaster, but only if the international community rises up and stops India, which it is currently not willing to do. Pakistan has to compel them by stating that if that happens, Pakistan will have no option but to do what is necessary to preserve its own existence. That is important. And I believe we should have a national consensus on this.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. Haris, other questions?
Sir,
Yes.
sir,
Please, sir. General wants to add something. Sir.
Sir, thank you very much, sir. The point is, I wish this question should have been posed to the President AJK, because you see, the point is, Brigadier Noor has raised the point of what do we mean by independent Kashmir, and Dr. Qazi has very beautifully and the nuances of how we look at it. Problem today is we need to look at it, what we can do and what we have done. The stance is very clear that the people of the Jammu and Kashmir must be given the right to choose as enshrined in the UN resolution. Period. However, the what Sardar Masood raised a point, and he said time is very important, and we have a maximum of another 2 years. Since 5th of August, it's 1 year and 7 months have passed, and another 2 years. In 1 month and 7 months, when we 1 year and 7 months, when we look back, did we try all what Dr. Qazi is saying, or Mr. Qazi is saying? We have tried to highlight, but we are not showing that thing which Lodhi highlighted. It is the resolve which should be visible, which Dr. Qazi also mentioned. The people must believe what we are saying. Unfortunately, what we are saying is not backed up by the resolve. What is happening is a disillusionment amongst the masses, both sides of the line of control. Please, let's not stay in our own wishful desire that no, it will not happen. Yes, they are giving sacrifices. There are people like Sayyid Gilani who still, when he stands up, everybody with him, we are Muslims, we are Pakistanis, we are Pakistanis, we are Muslims, that we are Kashmiri. That is one aspect. Kashmiriyat is another aspect. Demographic change is the main factor which is actually really working as a catalyst for the people inside the valley to stand up against the Modi's subjugation. However, what we must never forget, bulk of the Kashmiris are very poor people. Their lives, their livestock, what have we done for that? They would look for any opportunity in any form. If you can look at the video clips of the people during these this district level elections, the people were saying we are fed up of the old people. So even then, if you look at it, 75 out of the total seats, the largest single party which has come out of these district elections is actually BJP. So what are we trying to, why are we not trying to really bring everyone together? The Muslims have to be brought together only at one point agenda, that they must exercise the right of self-determination. That is whether they want to stay with India or they want to get out. That is why the Nara of Azadi should be only brought. We have to mold it. We have to guide it and channelize it in a manner that it should be no India first. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Any other question, Haris?
Sir, we have a few questions left with us, but we are.
We can have last question.
Okay, sir. The question is from Mr. Zafar Iqbal Yusufzai. He is a senior research associate at the SVI. How can Pakistan garner the new Biden administration support for the cause of Kashmir in wake of the August 5th, 2019 to stop the Indian atrocities in Indian occupied Kashmir? Ambassador Qazi.
Again, a diplomatic angle, sir.
Well, thank you very much. I'll also try and be very brief. The Biden administration is not going to do anything very different from what all previous administrations have done. Some of them have veered towards completely supporting India. Some have been less supportive of India, but they do not want to see a war between India and Pakistan, especially since both have become nuclear weapon states. So their emphasis will be the prevention of war, because these are two nuclear weapon states, and the empty counseling of negotiations in order to try and find a solution to Kashmir, no matter how long it takes. And in effect, but India now is launched upon a genocidal course. And so what do we do? It is not a longer term problem. Negotiations may give you results over the longer term, which we can live with conceptually, possibly. But here, India is completely aborting the negotiating process. As I told you, the LOC is finished, the Shimla agreement has finished, it refuses to talk with Pakistan, it refuses to listen to the pressure of the world, and it can get away with it because the world is not terribly serious with regard to India. It likes it. America wants it as a strategic ally against China, and America has made it clear to Pakistan that we will not treat you equally with India. India is more important to us. And Pakistan has a strategic relationship with China, not with America and all. So the only thing Pakistan can do, and yes, it's not an easy thing, but Pakistan, if we take this position, and I can only repeat myself here, that India, by pursuing a course based on genocide in Kashmir, is undermining the total credibility of Pakistan if Pakistan does not stand up and stop India, despite all the risks. Only then, it's not that you will have nuclear war. You won't have nuclear war. You won't have any war, but that will only be because the international community will worry and will be hugely concerned. And let it threaten you with FATF. Let it threaten you with all the sanctions. You can say these mean nothing when our existence comes into play. And India, through its actions in occupied Kashmir, is actually threatening the existence of Pakistan because we have said so often that India, Kashmir is our major priority, Shahrag, all of this stuff and all, and we've sacrificed, we've been to war with India on so many occasions, so many sacrifices, and when India ups the ante to genocide, हम पीछे बैठ जाते हैं. अगर ये नौबत है, अगर ये सूरत हाल है, तो then we should stand openly and tell the Kashmiris that unfortunately we have no options. We only have the diplomatic option. We are with you forever and ever and ever, but we cannot risk our survival by going into a possibly nuclear war with you. Either you do that and then sort of hope that something will happen over the next 50 years when India will by then have completed its process of genocide, changed the population, as Sardar Sahib was saying, and you can then ask for a plebiscite, which would then go in favor of India because they will have changed the population and all. And you only have diplomacy, and diplomacy means words. Diplomacy has to be backed. That is why diplomacy or war, why war has been defined by Clausewitz as diplomacy by other means. So, to war and diplomacy go together. And if you don't even have the option of threatening war in order to avoid war, you have no diplomacy. So we have to understand this.
Thank you very much, sir. Just by way of conclusion, I've just jotted down a few points, and top of the list is the importance of short-term effective plan and execution, short-term policy plan and its execution. I think we have no time. All of us, we agreed on that. We need to enhance our own leverages, whatever they are, and importance of internal cohesion on Kashmir policy. All the politicians, they must sit down and at least show solidarity as far as the Kashmir policy is concerned, instead of pointing fingers that somebody has sold it or whatever it is. And I think it is a consensus that just diplomatic efforts alone will not get the results. We'll have to harness all efforts, diplomatic, political, lawfare, and military, and then make a wholesome policy and see which instrument can be forwarded at what time. I'm grateful to all the participants who have joined us today, and my special thanks to Excellency, the Ambassador, and the Great General. Thank you very much, Haris, and all those who have been instrumental to arrange this, webinar. It was useful. Haris, once you make your final recommendations, please circulate them to the worthy ambassador and also to the general, and then we will put them, wherever we have to give them. Thank you very much, everyone. So kind of you.
Thank you.
Allah Hafiz.
Allah Hafiz.